Saint Benedict of Nursia was born around the year 480 in Nursia, a small town located in the region of Umbria, Italy. The son of a noble and affluent family, he was instructed from an early age in the Christian faith and in the good virtues. His birth took place during a period of great political and social transformations marked by the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the advance of barbarian peoples on the Italian peninsula. While still young, Benedict was sent to Rome to complete his education. At that time, Rome lived in a climate of moral and spiritual decadence, which profoundly repulsed him. Contact with the dissolute life of the Roman students stirred in his heart the desire to withdraw from the world and seek the purity of interior life. It was in this period that his vocation to the eremitical life germinated. Disappointed with the Roman environment, Benedict decided to abandon his studies and withdraw to a solitary region. He found refuge in a small locality called Enfide, today Affile. There, he began to devote himself to prayer, fasting, and meditation, seeking to conform his life to the gospel. From an early age, the young man showed a rare spiritual maturity that drew the attention of the local inhabitants. His first act of detachment was to abandon the material goods inherited from his family. Benedict distributed part of his belongings to the poor and left the rest under the care of his trusted nurse. His purpose was to live entirely for God, detached from worldly concerns and devoted to seclusion. For some time, Benedict remained in Enfide, but he felt deep inside that he needed even greater seclusion. It was then that he met a monk named Romanus, who told him about a cave located in Subiaco, a place of difficult access where he could live in isolation. Benedict withdrew there, spending about 3 years in complete solitude, devoted only to prayer and spiritual combat. In the cave of Subiaco, Benedict lived a life of extreme austerity. He clothed himself in animal skins and sustained himself on the little food that the monk Romanus lowered to him by a rope. During that period, he faced various temptations and inner trials, especially against purity and discouragement. Yet his perseverance in prayer and penance made him increasingly strengthened in grace. The fame of Benedict's holiness began to spread through the surrounding areas. People came from afar to see him, to ask for spiritual advice, or merely to receive his blessing. Gradually, a group of disciples formed around him, desiring to follow his example of life consecrated to God. Despite his wish to live alone, Benedict realized that God was calling him to exercise the function of spiritual guide. With humility, he began to welcome those who approached him, guiding them in the life of prayer and teaching them the value of silence, humility, and obedience. It was in this context that Benedict began his work of founding monastic communities. The first community experience was not easy. Some monks, bothered by his rigorous discipline, went so far as to plan to poison him. It is said that when he made the sign of the cross over the cup, the vessel broke, revealing the hidden danger. After this episode, Benedict left that community and returned to solitude. But new disciples continued to arrive, desirous of sharing his life of prayer and work. Thus, little by little, 12 small monasteries arose around Subiaco, each with 12 monks, according to Christian tradition. Benedict understood that monastic life should be firmly anchored in liturgical prayer and manual labor. It was necessary to reconcile contemplation and action, creating a balance that helped the soul not to be distracted and to remain vigilant in the face of temptations. His charism attracted people of all social conditions, young nobles, peasants, experienced men, and beginners in the faith. Benedict welcomed everyone with equal attentiveness, considering them brothers in Christ. He taught that in the monastery, no one should be privileged because of origin or wealth. In Subiaco, Saint Benedict spent many years forming monks, writing instructions, and consolidating his method of religious life. During that period, he also faced opposition from clerics and nobles who did not understand his project. But his patience and meekness eventually overcame the resistance. A remarkable episode of his life in Subiaco was the conflict with an envious priest named Florentius, who tried to discredit and harm him in various ways. Florentius even sent women to seduce the monks and tried to poison Benedict. Despite these hostilities, Benedict responded with prayer and confidence in divine providence. When he realized that his presence caused division, Benedict decided to leave. He bid farewell to the brothers and headed toward the south of Italy. There, on a mountain called Cassino, he found the place where he would leave his most enduring legacy for the history of the Church. The move to Monte Cassino marked a new stage in Benedict's life. It was a pagan place where idols were still worshipped. Benedict, with missionary zeal, tore down the pagan altars, destroyed the idols, and began to evangelize the local people. His spiritual authority was so great that many converted to Christianity. At Monte Cassino, Benedict erected a monastery that would become the center of Western monasticism. There he began to organize the community more structurally, writing a rule of life that would forever mark Christian spirituality. The rule written by St. Benedict, known as the Rule of St. Benedict, is a balanced synthesis of prayer, work, and fraternity. It was not an abstract theological treatise, but a practical guide for community and spiritual life. Benedict's work at Monte Cassino soon gained renown throughout Italy. Monks from various regions came to learn from him and to take his teachings to other places. Thus began the diffusion of Benedictinism throughout Europe. The last years of St. Benedict were marked by intense spiritual activity and extraordinary gifts, such as prophecy and reading hearts. Many witnessed his miracles and wonders, yet he himself remained humble, attributing everything to God's mercy. Benedict never sought fame or power. His only ambition was to please Christ and save souls. This spirit of detachment became the hallmark of the Benedictine monks who would emerge in subsequent generations. The holiness of Benedict was recognized even by the barbarian peoples who had invaded Italy. Many Lombard and Gothic chiefs respected his monastery and saw in it a spiritual point of reference in a time of uncertainties. Throughout his life, Benedict always taught that monastic life was a school of the service of the Lord. The monastery should be a place where one learns to love God and neighbor, living in community and obedience. The expression ora et labora, which means pray and work, perfectly sums up the Benedictine spirit. Benedict believed that manual labor dignifies man and purifies the soul when united with constant prayer. At the end of the first part of this story, we see that St. Benedict transformed a life of personal seclusion into a work that changed the face of Christendom, founding a tradition that would span centuries and inspire thousands of monks. Upon arriving at Monte Cassino, Benedict found there not only material but also spiritual ruins. Paganism persisted strongly, and many inhabitants still offered sacrifices to the Roman gods. Moved by apostolic zeal, Benedict destroyed those symbols and dedicated the place to St. Martin and St. John the Baptist, initiating the construction of a church and the future monastery. To organize the life of the community, Benedict began to write what would become his greatest legacy, the Rule. It was not an improvised work, but the fruit of many years of experience, prayer, and discernment. Its purpose was to guide the monks to live in obedience, humility, and charity, so that each one would seek Christian perfection. The rule of Saint Benedict did not arise out of nowhere. It was inspired by earlier traditions of Eastern monasticism, especially in the writings of Saint Basil and the Rule of the Master. However, Benedict knew how to adapt these sources to the Latin and Roman context, making it accessible and realistic for Western communities. One of the most notable aspects of the rule is its balance. It is not excessively rigorous, but neither is it permissive. It provides for discipline, silence, and fasting, but also recognizes human frailty, inviting moderation and discernment. This balance is one of the reasons why the rule has remained alive for so many centuries. Benedict begins his text with firm and paternal words. "Listen, O son, to the precepts of the Master, and incline the ear of your heart." This initial invitation reveals the tone of the entire work, an exhortation to sincere discipleship and to love God above all else. In the rule, Benedict decrees that the monk's life be divided between liturgical prayer, the divine office, and manual or intellectual work. This division was revolutionary, for it gave work the dignity of service to God and neighbor, breaking with the mentality that only study or contemplation were noble. Another essential point is obedience to the abbot. For Benedict, the abbot represents Christ in the monastery and must be respected as a spiritual father. At the same time, the abbot must be a wise, prudent, and humble man, imposing nothing that exceeds the brother's strength. Fraternal charity occupies a central place in the rule. Benedict exhorts the monks to honor one another, to compete in paying mutual respect, and never to allow discord to take root in the community. The monastery must be a true school of Christian love. The monks were invited to live in the same place, under the same discipline and the same abbot. Stability was an important vow. Each monk committed himself to remain in that community until death, cultivating deep and persevering roots. Benedict also regulated the reception of guests. Every visitor should be welcomed as if he were Christ himself. This hospitality deeply marked the Benedictine tradition and helped monasteries become centers of charity and culture. For Benedict, nothing was more important than prayer. The divine office organized the hours of day and night, consecrating the entire time to God. From dawn until sunset, the community gathered to praise the Lord with psalms, hymns, and sacred readings. Silence had its spiritual value. It was not merely the absence of words, but an interior disposition to hear the voice of God. Benedict knew that the tongue could be the cause of many evils, so he recommended moderation in speech and recollection of the heart. The rule also addresses discipline and fraternal corrections. When someone committed faults, he received a moderate correction, always seeking amendment and not humiliation. Only in serious cases were there harsher punishments, and even then, the monk was not to be treated with contempt. Manual work included agriculture, care of the sick, copying manuscripts, and various tasks that guaranteed the monastery's self-sufficiency. This constant effort kept the community away from idleness, which Benedict considered the enemy of the soul. Dress was simple, appropriate to the climate and work. Vanity and unnecessary riches were not permitted. Everything should reflect evangelical poverty and sobriety of life. The monks made vows of obedience, stability, and conversion of morals. This last commitment meant continuously striving to leave sin behind and grow in virtue. For Benedict, monastic life was a path of constant interior purification. When he finished composing his rule, Benedict knew that it was not only for his generation, but also for the future. He wrote with clarity, simplicity, and spiritual authority that would outlast his time. At Monte Cassino, the community flourished. The monastery became a beacon of prayer, culture, and hospitality, attracting vocations and pilgrims from many regions. The monk's example inspired confidence and reverence among Christians and even among pagan peoples. It was in that environment of intense community life that Benedict performed miracles, some recorded by Pope St. Gregory the Great in his dialogues. Among them were the healing of the sick, the multiplication of food, and the liberation of the possessed. The fame of St. Benedict's holiness surpassed the limits of the monastery. Bishops, priests, and lay people came to seek his counsel, certain of finding in him a man full of the Holy Spirit. His discernment and inner peace were notable gifts. Once, according to tradition, Benedict saw in spirit the soul of his twin sister, Saint Scholastica, ascend to heaven in the form of a dove. It was the sign that she had died and entered divine glory. This episode reveals the profound spiritual bond between the two siblings. Benedict also foretold his own death. He announced to the brothers that he would soon leave this world and asked them to prepare everything for his burial. His last days were lived in recollection, prayer, and contemplation. Shortly before dying, he asked to be supported standing, for he wanted to present himself to God in prayer. Thus, with his arms raised to heaven, he gave his soul to the Creator, surrounded by the community he had loved and guided so much. After his death, the monastery of Monte Cassino continued to grow in spiritual and cultural influence. Benedict's disciples took his rule to other regions, laying the foundations of Western monasticism that would sustain European civilization in the Middle Ages. The heritage of St. Benedict became so important that he was proclaimed the father of Western monasticism and centuries later declared patron of Europe by St. John Paul II, thus recognizing his essential role in building a Christian culture. During his life at Monte Cassino, St. Benedict manifested extraordinary spiritual gifts, which were witnessed by his monks and by visitors from distant lands. Pope St. Gregory the Great, who wrote Benedict's principal biography, reports that he had the gift of prophecy and reading hearts, being able to reveal secret thoughts and hidden intentions. One of the best-known miracles occurred when a builder working on the monastery's reconstruction accidentally dropped a sickle to the bottom of a lake. The workman, distressed, asked St. Benedict for help, who took the tool's handle, traced the sign of the cross over the water, and the sickle miraculously returned to the surface intact. This sign further strengthened the brothers' faith. Another prodigy recorded in the dialogues is the multiplication of food. One day, a crowd of poor people came to the monastery, but there were few loaves to distribute. Benedict offered a brief prayer, and when the bread was handed out, all were fed and provisions remained. For him, nothing was impossible when one trusted fully in God's providence. St. Benedict was also known for his power to expel demons. Many tormented people were brought to him, and with the sign of the cross or with simple words, Benedict freed them from evil oppression. These happenings caused his name to be respected and feared by impure spirits. A symbol inseparable from his memory is the medal of St. Benedict. Although its spread occurred centuries later, it contains inscriptions that evoke the saint's protective power against evil. The famous Crux Sancti Patris Benedicti, Cross of the Holy Father Benedict, recalls confidence in Christ's saving power and the intercession of the monastic patriarch. The cross and the broken cup, depicted on the medal, allude to the episode in which they tried to poison him. When he blessed the cup, it shattered, revealing the poison. This sign was interpreted by the monks as proof that God was guarding his servant from invisible dangers. Besides physical miracles, Saint Benedict performed true conversions of the heart. Many men who arrived at Monte Cassino, driven by fear or curiosity, ended up leaving everything to live the monastic life. Benedict's humble and pure witness had an irresistible attraction. The monastery became a point of reference in times of political and cultural instability. During the Ostrogoth and Lombard invasions, Monte Cassino remained a bastion of faith and Christian culture, conserving manuscripts and forming generations of monks. Benedict's spiritual pedagogy consisted of cultivating constant progress. He exhorted the monks never to be discouraged if they fell into weakness, but to start over with humility and confidence. For him, perseverance was the sure path that led to perfection. The rule of Saint Benedict gradually spread throughout Europe. First, it reached neighboring regions of Campania and Latium. Then, it was adopted by monasteries in Gaul, Germania, and later England. Everywhere, the rule flourished, adapted to local needs without losing its original spirit. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed and the Germanic peoples occupied its territory, it was in Benedictine monasteries that classical culture was preserved. There, ancient books were copied, knowledge transmitted, and faith and Christian charity kept alive. Many kings and nobles saw in the figure of the Benedictine abbot a prudent and just advisor. Throughout the Middle Ages, Benedictine abbots played a decisive role in pacifying conflicts, evangelizing, and advising rulers. The motto Ora et Labora became not only an internal rule of monasteries, but an inspiration for all lay Christians who wished to unite work with spiritual life. This ideal profoundly influenced Western spirituality. Saint Benedict always taught that humility was the ladder that led to heaven. In the rule, he describes the 12 degrees of humility, which begin with the fear of God and culminate in perfect charity. Each degree corresponds to a virtue that the monk must cultivate throughout life. Charity among brothers was considered more important than any external practice. Benedict insisted that without fraternal love, every spiritual effort becomes empty. This emphasis on communion anticipated many teachings that would later be deepened by other saints. Benedictine influence also reached liturgical reforms. The organization of the divine office proposed by Benedict was absorbed by the Church and became a model for community prayer through the centuries. Respect for time, care for the poor, dignity of work, spiritual discipline, and hospitality were values that radiated from the life of St. Benedict and that have been perpetuated in thousands of Benedictine monasteries spread across Europe. During the Carolingian Renaissance, in the 8th and 9th centuries, the rule of St. Benedict was officially adopted as a norm for the monasteries of the Frankish Empire by decision of Charlemagne and his successors. Thus, it was consolidated as the universal standard of Western monastic life. Not only men, but also women, followed Benedict's path. Female monasteries arose inspired by the rule, such as those of Saint Scholastica and many other abbesses who bore witness to holiness. Throughout history, various religious orders reformed the Benedictine ideal, renewing fervor and discipline: Cluniacs, Cistercians, and Camaldolese. Each of them preserved, in essence, the spiritual heritage of St. Benedict. The figure of St. Benedict remained an example of discernment, balance, and interior peace. His witness of radical fidelity to the gospel inspired saints like St. Bernard of Clairvaux, St. Gregory the Great, and St. Thomas Aquinas. Over time, Monte Cassino became a symbol not only of spirituality, but also of cultural resistance. During World War II, the monastery was destroyed by bombings, but later rebuilt with care, preserving the saint's memory. In 1964, Pope Paul VI declared Saint Benedict the principal patron of Europe, recognizing his role in shaping the continent's Christian identity. This title reaffirmed the relevance of his legacy in the face of modern challenges. Benedictine spirituality remains alive in hundreds of active monasteries around the world. Nuns and monks still follow the rule, dedicating their lives to silence, prayer, and service to the community. At the end of this section, we see that Saint Benedict was not merely the founder of a monastery, but the creator of a way of life that gave spiritual, cultural, and moral stability to Europe, planting roots that have crossed centuries of history. In current times, the life and message of Saint Benedict continue to illuminate the Church and society. The quest for balance between prayer and work remains a response to a culture often marked by haste, distraction, and individualism. The rule of Saint Benedict offers a path of interior harmony that many still rediscover. The monastery of Monte Cassino, rebuilt after World War II, once again became a spiritual and cultural center. Pilgrims from all over the world visit the place to pray by the relics of Saint Benedict and to learn about the historical heritage carefully preserved by the monks. Benedictine spirituality is lived in many different contexts. There are urban monasteries that host lay people on retreats, rural communities that cultivate the land with respect for creation, and contemplative monasteries, where life flows in near continuous silence and prayer. The ideal of hospitality taught by Benedict became a prophetic witness. In times of indifference and closed attitudes, monasteries continue to open their doors to all who seek peace, counsel, or simply a space for recollection. Monastic life, inspired by Saint Benedict, has attracted men and women of all ages. Many young people feel called to consecrate themselves totally to God, leaving behind the comfort and distractions of the world to live the radicality of the gospel. In the lay sphere, the Benedictine charism also manifests itself. Benedictine oblates are commitments assumed by the faithful who, while remaining in the world, seek to live the spirituality of the rule in their family, professional, and community routine. The school of the Lord's service, as Benedict called the monastery, is still today a place where people learn to love, forgive, and seek the truth. The climate of silence, simplicity, and prayer becomes an occasion for deep encounter with God. Another aspect most relevant today is respect for work and care for created goods. Ecological awareness, so necessary today, finds inspiration in the balanced life of monks, who have always valued the cultivation of the land and moderation in the use of resources. Saint Benedict is also an example of discernment in troubled times. He learned to read the signs of his time, understand his people's spiritual needs, and create a response that lasted for centuries. His legacy inspires us to wisely face contemporary challenges. In his coat of arms and on the medal that bears his name, the cross occupies a central place. It is a sign that the Christian life, according to Benedict, must have the crucified Christ as its highest reference. Victory over evil and strength against temptations come from communion with the cross. The famous inscription, Crux sacra sit mihi lux, non draco sit mihi dux, may the Holy Cross be my light, let not the dragon be my guide, remains today a prayer of trust and spiritual defense recited by the faithful throughout the world. The rule of Saint Benedict was adopted not only in Catholic monasteries. Some Anglican and Lutheran communities also took inspiration from it, recognizing its universal value as a path of communal Christian life. During the pontificate of Benedict XVI, whose papal name honored Saint Benedict, there was a renewed interest in monasticism. The emeritus pope valued the Benedictine legacy as an essential pillar of European identity and contemplative life. In many countries, Saint Benedict is venerated as a protector against spiritual and material dangers. His medal is used as a sacramental of protection, blessed according to a specific rite approved by the Church. In social, political, and moral crises, the figure of Saint Benedict reappears as a guiding light. His witness of firmness, serenity, and trust in providence inspires Christian communities not to yield to despair or hatred. In ecumenical dialogue, Saint Benedict also occupies a prominent place. His legacy is a point of convergence among different Christian confessions that recognize the spiritual and cultural value of his work. The rule teaches values indispensable to the modern world: moderation, balance, listening, mutual respect, and the priority of seeking God above all things. These are seeds of hope in a society often lacking meaning. The value of stability, so dear to St. Benedict, contrasts with the contemporary mentality of constant change and superficiality. The decision to remain faithful to a place, a community, and a purpose is a true silent revolution. In family life, many parents rediscover that ordered routine, respect for the rhythm of the day, and daily prayer transform the home into a small monastery where one learns to love and serve. In theological and spiritual studies, Saint Benedict occupies a place of relevance. His rule is analyzed in universities, seminaries, and spirituality courses, being considered a classic of Christian literature. In the realm of sacred art, Saint Benedict inspired paintings, sculptures, stained glass, and hymns. His image, generally with the abbatial crozier and the Book of the Rule, has become a symbol of monastic life and Christian wisdom. In times of secularism and religious indifference, the figure of Saint Benedict reminds us that holiness does not pass away and that fidelity to God bears fruits that last. His life is an invitation to every Christian to seek the essential. Many contemporary testimonies narrate how retreats in Benedictine monasteries transformed lives, revived vocations, and healed inner wounds. Thus, Benedict continues to be master and intercessor for countless souls. In celebrating his memory, the entire Church recognizes his unique importance. Saint Benedict was not merely a holy man, but a spiritual father who, with simplicity and courage, shaped the history of faith. Concluding this narrative, we see that Saint Benedict of Nursia remains alive in the Church as a luminous sign of peace, wisdom, and love of Christ. His legacy echoes in the liturgy, in monasteries, and in the hearts of millions of faithful who find in his rule a safe path to God.